thank you everybody for taking your time to join us this evening. So before we get started, a little bit about background about myself. I've been in the DC area since 2000, and since 2005 or so, I've been actively involved in agile project management, transformation, worked as a scrum master, as a coach, as a change consultant, and have also been involved in a lot of transformation activities. So what I'm going to share with you today is a lot of things that I learned along the way, and how change management, when it is not incorporated into your agile transition, your transformation, where challenges happen, and what are some of the things that we could do to improve your transformation, to improve the adoption of agile. So that's what we're here for. Um, so we're going to be I'll be talking about 5 barriers that impede agile adoption. We're going to talk about 9 top factors that impede organizational change. We'll talk a little bit about culture, because you can't talk about change management without talking about culture. We are going to talk about 4 drivers that influence the culture. And then we're going to talk about what can you do about it? What are some of the things that you can start doing to start incorporating change management into your practices. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Um, as I said, I've been around the block a few times. I've been involved in commercial as well as federal projects. I have, and most recently now, I'm into the financial or mortgage sector. But one of the things that I see common, in all the programs and projects that I've worked with, is whether it's a large transformation where we are coming from waterfall and are introducing agile to the organization, or the teams are doing some agile, but they want to improve their agile maturity, or they're doing scrum and now they're scaling their practices, or better still, they have scaled their practices, but now they really want to extend agile to other groups and organizations within the large organizations. So no matter what flavor of change that your organization is going through, there are a lot of challenges that happen whenever we're trying to make any kind of change, right? So it's not like that human beings are opposed to change. It turns out that human beings don't like to be changed. So there's a human factor plays such an important role in any of these changes. And a lot of customers and stakeholders I talk to, they said, "Oh, we're not going through a transformation." They feel that transformation has a solid start and a solid end, and once the transformation ends, the transformation is stopped. But in reality, transformation is a continuous process, right? You're just evolving from one stage to the other. And this, irrespective of what stage you are in, one of the things that that reminds me of a saying by a quote by Jared Spool, who says that he's learned about 2 kinds of organizations: organizations that are currently struggling through a major transformation, and then organizations that they don't know that they are currently struggling. So it becomes distinct in that matter, that that you're struggling, or you don't know that you're struggling. But irrespective, most transformations do struggle, right? And it's all about change management. And since this is a change management meetup, our topic today is going to touch upon change management, but it's also going to talk about agile and how do these things integrate, and what are some of the challenges that we should be looking for. So talking about challenges, recently the 15th State of Agile report came out, and no surprise there. A lot of common things from what we have seen in the last many years. There is a lot of challenges relating to adopting and scaling Agile. And this is just copy pasted from the report. I just added those arrows. And if you can follow along those arrows, the purple denote, it's culture related, red is people related, and then there are few which are people and culture. So there are 9 out of all the top, I think there are 14 or so here. There are 9 which are directly related to people and culture. And internal culture continues to be a challenge. So let's talk about, I've taken some information from this slide that I'm going to talk about in the next one. So let's talk about the top 6 barriers that come in the way of agile adoption. And I'm using the word agile adoption loosely because it could be transformation, it could be maturing your practices, it could be enhancing your current practices, or moving from few teams to more teams working concurrently. Either way, these apply to all of them, right? So the very first one is inconsistencies in processes and practices, right? So when team members don't know, what process or practices to follow, there can be definitely challenges in which the adoption can take place. This definitely falls in the wheelhouse of our presentation today, which is cultural clashes. There are challenges in which culturally there is pushback, and then there's resistance to change. So 2 and 3 are very interrelated. And then we have, lack of skills or experience, absence of leadership participation. Again, this could be people, this could be culture. So these definitely impact, how your agile adoption takes place. And change is hard, right? I mean, a prime example is at 5:45, if you had asked me, I would have said, I'm ready for this evening's presentation. I ran through the slides, I checked Zoom, everything is good to go. And guess what? 5 minutes before I was supposed to meet Miranda, I rebooted my laptop just to make sure it was going to run fine. And you know what? Zoom doesn't work. So you just have to deal with change. But change, when it is happening at a large organizational level, it is so many small changes that are happening at each and every tier of the organization that has to be led, that has to be managed, that has to be monitored, and that has to be strategically thought through, especially any large changes, right? So organizations don't take quick turns like cars do, right? Organizations take turns like ships do sometimes, because those decisions, a lot of times they come from the leadership, and that it has to have a good communication with the rest of the organization, a good analysis of impact, and especially in this particular area, in DC area, there are so many different federal organizations. Change, making any kind of change requires so many fiduciary and legal, hoops to pass through. Making any change is extremely difficult here. Now, just think about for a minute in your own minds, right? When is the last time that you tried to make any change in your own project or your program level, and everything went very smoothly? Chances are it didn't happen that way, right? Because everything that we think is going to go in a particular way, it ends up moving in a different direction. Because end of the day, change is hard, right? And Murphy's law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So let's talk about, what impedes change, especially at the organizational level. So if you would, let's do a quick chat poll. If you could put in the chat window something that you think that you have experienced that impedes change in your organization. Lack of clarity, making the connection for the change, what's in it for every level of the organization. Absolutely. Incumbents have been successful in an old system, yeah, and they feel that that change is just going to happen everywhere. Battling leaders, you have some excellent points here. Oh, good to see you, Alberto. People want to hold on to the status quo. Yeah, absolutely. And then there are egos involved, and there are powers involved. Absolutely. Purpose of change. I see from Amy, lip service, but lack of willingness to actually do the change. Absolutely. You've seen that funny cartoon where the person is asking who wants change, and everybody raises their hand, and the person asks in the next picture who wants to lead the change, and nobody raises their hand, right? So everybody wants to experience the change, but nobody wants to lead it. Absolutely. Starting change strategy too late, absolutely. And then communication, I think many people have talked about. Great points. Lack of transparency, absolutely. So I've put together some thoughts here. Let me share. So here, based on my experience, here are 9, really big impediments that can happen. And of course, it would change from organization to organization. And I'm not going to reach each one of them. We talked about resistance to change already, inability to see the big picture, and also inability to communicate the big picture. Too much focus on outputs instead of focusing on outcomes. That could lead to resistance to change. Viewing change as an event rather than a process, right? So change is a pretty long process that needs to take place. And if you think that, okay, you had a meeting with the people involved with the change and your job is done, think again, right? You really have to lead them throughout the change. And we're going to talk about a couple of models today in which we will understand that better. Ignoring the importance and impact on culture, right? So the culture, first of all, there is resistance to change because of the culture. And then when you're trying to make the change, making the change stick also can be a challenge if the culture does not, support that kind of a change. So here you have, 9 impediments to successful organizational change, and I'll be sharing the slide. And it's a struggle. Every day is a struggle, right? It's like rock paper scissors, right? You try, but you never know when you're going to win. And the reality is that any kind of change, especially organizational change, and if we talk about transformation, uh, it's people, process, and technology. There are 3 parts that are involved in any kind of large change. Unfortunately, a lot of focus is put into process and technology, but not enough into the people or the human side of change, right? And I think more and more organizations are realizing that you have to have good strategy and tactical steps to think about, how are you going to lead the human side of change? So organizational change management has a lot of roots in leading change from the human side of change perspective. So if you ignore that, chances are that any kind of adoption, transformation, or change that you're trying to make in your organization is going to suffer. It's probably not going to be successful unless you really invest in the human side of change. Because organizations, especially large organizations, who are going through change themselves, and they're operating in a world that's dynamic and what is called a VUCA world, right? Which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and there is so much ambiguity there. So when you're operating in a VUCA world, there's so many dynamic changes happening because of technology, because of new changes in the competitive marketplace that you're competing in, the human side of change, the talent change, even within your organization, if any kind of change happens. One of the organizations that I'm supporting right now, they had a leadership change recently. The change happened about 2 months ago. Because of the change, so many different changes happened within that organization. Some of the strategic goals had to be changed. So many people got moved around within the organization, and that creates a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty. Things that were going a certain way now suddenly, don't go the same way, and people don't know what's happening next. There is lack of clarity, just leading to ambiguity. Um, so what do you do in a situation like that, right? You have to manage the change. So you have to bring in the vision and making sure that everybody has a shared vision and they understand what the vision means, in a clear way, and then bringing agility into the organization, where your teams are nimble, you are able to respond to market conditions in a much faster way, right? Faster, predictable way, and you're continuously delivering value. So now that we're talking about Agile, um, where does organizational change management fit with an Agile implementation? Or if your organization is already doing Agile, how does it help with making sure that change management is happening at the right pace? It is helping the organization meet its strategic objectives. Um, the three challenges, that Agile and OCM within their integrated together can help solve. The first one is, when there are silos within the whole organization. So change management is not led through a central, hub and spoke model. It is distributed throughout the organization. And that could be a problem because it may not follow a strategic path. And couple of things that you can do to help with it is that, incorporate organizational change management strategies right from the beginning of any change that you're trying to make, any transformation that you're trying to make, and ensure that you get leadership buy-in. And actually buy-in is not enough. Like somebody wrote on the chat window that, there's lip service but not enough action. We really want to get leadership champion us, but we also want them to help us in this journey. Helping us communicate, helping us celebrate small wins. We want leadership to be part of this change. You cannot just outsource change and think that it's just going to happen, right? And piggybacking on that, the second problem area is where stakeholders don't understand, and sometimes they're not prepared for the changes that are going to happen. Sometimes they don't know what kind of changes are coming up, down the path. So bringing clarity and involving them from the beginning is very important. And empowering decision making, really we talk a lot about, decentralizing decision making. An area where a lot of organizations don't do well is even small decisions have to be made by managers, senior managers, and leaders. If we want stakeholders to have time to help us with change management, some of those practices need to change, right? So where the decision making can start becoming more decentralized. And then, a continuous focus to ensure that the stakeholders are engaged. Engaging the stakeholders throughout the journey is important. A lot of these changes fail because stakeholders become totally disengaged from the change. They feel that they were never actually included in that change, and therefore they feel that they are alienated and they don't really have to support the change. And that can be solved if you really start involving them in the change. So they feel empowered and they feel that they are actually part of the change. And last but not least, something that I've seen a lot of times is with all these changes that are happening, there is a tendency to lose your focus on the very purpose of why the organization is making the change in the first place. The organizations typically make changes to be able to serve their customers better, to get more market share, and also to be financially superior than they were, last year or the year before. They definitely want to get economic gains into the market. But if you become too involved in everything else and actually lose track of the real purpose of doing Agile or real purpose of making the change, then that could be a problem. So paying attention to the voice of the customer, right? End of the day, we are doing all this work for the customer, who is the king, because he or she is paying the bills, right? And then having segmented use of the people that you have in the organization, and I apologize for using the word resources here, using your talent, using your people in the right way, so that you have people focused on change management, you have people focused on your financial changes that are happening. There are people focused on, what kind of products which are coming up in the market, and making sure that your organization is able to take advantage of the agile practices so that we can respond to those changes in a much faster, effective, and efficient manner. Now, all these things sound really great, but unless you address the cultural shift, right? The way in which the organization perceives that change and is going to be engaged in the change is not going to happen. So culture is going to be extremely, extremely important. And as Peter Drucker said, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So everybody repeat after me, please. Take your microphones off from mute, and everybody repeat after me. Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Culture eats strategy for lunch.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Lunch. Yeah,
All the
absolutely.
above.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's very important to remember that, right? You could have the best plans in the world. You could have the best Gantt chart in the world. But guess what? If your organization culture is not going to support the change, those plans are not going to work. But before that, let's try to understand what does culture mean? What is culture, right? I was thinking about it the other day, and I would say it's like love, right? There are so many books, poems, songs about love. We all have experienced it, but if I ask you to define love, I bet you will struggle, right? So the same thing with culture, right? We all have experienced culture, good or bad. But if I tell you, hey, define culture, right? If I just put you on a spot and say define culture, chances are that you're going to struggle. So let's try to do that now, right? So in my mind, culture really boils down to the shared values, the attributes, and the characteristics of an organization. And the more simpler way to say is that how does an organization get its work done and deliver value? How does it get its work done and deliver value? That is, the culture of that organization. I don't know about others, but whenever I have changed jobs, one of the first things that I do before I even apply to a company is I go to Glassdoor, and I want to get a good understanding of what is the culture of that organization. By looking at some of the comments, by looking at some of the metrics, I first try to understand, am I going to be a good fit in that organization? And there are so many books written about culture. There are so many, articles and blog posts. But the important thing is, if we understand, what drives culture, you might have a better shot at solving some of those problems. So let's try to understand the 4 drivers of culture. The 4 drivers of culture is behaviors, the work culture, the paradigms, and execution patterns. So what does that mean, Toby? You talk about these 4 drivers of culture. What does it mean? So what is behaviors, right? So these are collective behaviors. When you think of an organization that you were part of in the past, or an organization that you deal with, do you see a commonality between people in the way they behave, in the way they react to things, in the way they perhaps even ask questions to you? And think of the same thing about those leaders, right? So what is some common traits that you see in the way they behave, in the way they come across? And the same can be said about small organizations as well, right? I mean, if you think of Chick-fil-A, right, what comes to your mind about the behavior of people who work there? Right? I'm not going to say one way or the other, but I want you to think about and just think about another kind of restaurant that you go to and think about the behaviors that you see there. And that tells you about the culture of that organization. So next up is work culture, right? How does it get work done? How does it get work done? Is it self-organized? Are they driven? Is it like a slave driving kind of work culture? Do people take pride in their work? So that influences culture. Your work culture influences the organization culture. Paradigms is the next one, which is, what are some common beliefs and values, assumptions that people may have? Do meetings happen in meetings, or do meetings happen after the meeting when they're talking to each other, but nobody says anything in the meetings, right? That means they have a fear. They don't have psychological safety. Or they feel that if they say something, they might get reprimanded. And last but not least, what is the execution patterns? Like, how do different groups do their work? So these, ladies and gentlemen, are the 4 drivers of culture. If you think about culture of your organization, think through these 4 lenses, and you might have a slightly better idea of what culture means in your organization and what you need to be aware of before you start to make any kind of change. So we talked a little bit about culture. We talked about few drivers. We talked about why change is hard. Let's spend a couple of minutes to talk about the 3 phases of change, right? So at any given point of time, you have the current state in which your organization is, and they have to go through a transition and then go into the future state. So what typically happens is that in the current state, it may not be the best in the world. It may not be bringing the results. It may be problematic, but people are comfortable in that state, in that current state. Maybe they've plateaued. Maybe they just got used to the bad ways of doing things or the old ways of doing things. So there is comfort there. The next is this transition state, right? So when any change is introduced, people generally go through a stage of stress and anxiety because the future is not very clear to them. It's unknown. They are not very clear on how things will happen, whether or not the transition or adoption is going to be successful. They don't know what rewards will come, what risks that are unknown at this point may actually materialize. So a lot of these things happen. So understanding the 3 phases of change is important because it's our job to help go through this change and make the transition as less painful as possible, but also make the change effective. Are you with me so far? All right, so let's dig a little deeper into this concept of change. You might have heard of the Satir change model, and this particular model has been adopted into a lot of different change models. But this was the very beginning. This was developed by a family therapist by the name of Virginia Satir. And it was designed originally to help people improve the way in which they cope with major unexpected life changes. That's what it originally was created for, but it really took its roots into all kinds of organizational and any kind of change for that matter, right? So managers and leaders can use this model to really understand how their teams actually go through the change process and help them cope through this change. So let me just quickly walk through what this means, right? So in the beginning, there is performance that's happening, and it is at a certain level. That's the old status quo. And whenever a change is introduced, there is going to be a lot of resistance. And typically what happens right after the resistance is that there is going to be a dip, which is, your performance, your engagement, your motivation of the teams, everything can just fall. Sometimes this is called a valley of despair. So when change happens, there's resistance and things fall down, and there's going to be chaos. And in matter of time, if the change is managed and led in the right way, over a period of time, things will start getting better. We might lose some people, we might lose revenue, we might lose some sales, we might lose other things. But over a period of time, if it is managed properly, it will start getting better, and people will start integrating new practices, and a new status quo will arise, which actually was way better than what it was in the past. Okay, this sounds good, but how do we do it? So here are some thoughts. I'm going to be brief because I think I'm coming up on time. The first one is, like aligning on the goals, ensuring that even before you start to bring any big change, ensuring that everybody understands what the change is. Everybody has a shared understanding. Any agile transformation or change that is happening, ensuring that there is a clear roadmap of what the as is stated and what is the to be status, ensuring that it's aligned to strategy, and really remembering that becoming agile or doing agile or implementing agile is not the goal. The goal is to bring business value, quicker time to market, deliver in a more predictable manner, and really bring economic benefits to their organization, right? So aligning on those goals up front is important. When the chaos happens, this is when you really need to train and support your team members from an agile perspective, ensuring that the foundational agile practices are taught, ensuring that a continuous improvement culture is built into it, and really becoming a learning organization where, okay, we failed, what can we learn from it, and quickly pivot and start doing better, right? Bringing that reinforcement is important. And then actually understanding when this upward trend will take place, what are some of the new skills and disciplines that we need, and we start gearing the teams towards that, right, with that prediction. And then you start, once that happens and the teams start getting better, then you replicate that change across the organization, and you start improving your delivery processes, and making changes not in just small pockets, but making holistic improvements, because the whole organization is actually now seeing the benefits of the change. And last but not least, right, ensure that you are celebrating and improving continuously. And remember that any of this change is a continuous process. It's not a stop and go. So how do you integrate organizational change management with agile? So I think I'm probably repeating a few of these things because I talked about it in the last slide, but it's important, and that's why I have it again here. Ensuring that change management principles are incorporated early on. It should not be an afterthought, right? Bringing organizational change management professionals like Miranda to your organization, helping them help you, bringing their consulting services to you. That's going to be important. And communicating consistently throughout the change management process is going to be extremely important. I talked about, celebrating early wins, and very, very important, engagement from senior leadership, not just lip service. We want engagement from them. I've seen lot of success when change management is not done in a hub and spoke model. Rather, it is done in a manner where organizational change management consultants and representatives are embedded with the delivery teams. That will start changing some of the cultural aspects of the change, as opposed to teams looking at change management people as outsiders, right? Once you start incorporating that, that will really help. and engaging with your senior leadership and end users. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I shared some ideas where, how you can incorporate OCM into Agile. I feel that I have given you round wheels. Your organization, though, may not be ready for round wheels, because what I've seen a lot of times is whenever we try to bring about change, they're like, no, we are very comfortable the way we do things here. You know why? Because we've always done it that way. We don't want to change things. We don't want to change things that are not broken. We don't want those round wheels. We're happy with those square wheels. Well, guess what? Change is difficult, right? And getting buy-in from people, helping them understand why the round wheels that you have on the back of your truck can really help you go faster, right? You might lose a little bit of time when you change the square wheels to your round wheels, but eventually it's going to help you. And as leaders, as change consultants, if we give up on them and we just are bystanders in the back pushing organizations that are running on square wheels, we're not going to go anywhere. But how do you get people to change the wheels? That's the magic that I'm hoping that all of you are going to bring in your organization. So think about the assumptions that they have in that organization. Think about the behaviors that they have in the organization. Understand the culture, then bring in change that will help you to get those results. And the 9 areas that I would love for you to focus on is going to be these. Getting the people with the right skills, the right talent to help move through that change. If you are going into an Agile realm or DevOps realm or any of that, bringing the right people with the right skills is important. Engaging the middle managers is extremely important. And honestly, middle managers have it the worst because they feel, first of all, that their powers are going to go away whenever this change happens. They're very uncertain about their future, and a lot of times they are left behind. So engaging them and making them your change agents is going to be really helpful. And ensuring, again, I'm repeating on communication, is that proactive communication is happening throughout. Short video clips, success stories, newsletters. If you have an internal bulletin board somewhere, putting pictures there, having a happy hour or a cake celebrating something, all those things are really going to be helpful. And then managing resistance, that's easier said than done, but you really have to think about what resistance might come your way and pre-plan and make those changes that is going to bring you the best ROI. With that, I think I've come to the end. And I would like all of you to take a minute to read this. So I want to leave you with that thought and really ask you, when you go back to your organizations, what actions will you take to make change management happen and stick? Because if you're an egg, you have only 2 options. You're going to hatch, or option B, you're going to go bad. Thank you. I will open it up for questions now.
Hi, Toby, this is Tanya. I'm not sure if Miranda wanted us to raise our hand or whatnot, but I'd like to get your insight on this virtual world we live in now. A lot of the, how do we translate those, 9 focus areas into a virtual world, I find that it's harder for our managers to actually be the supervisors that they've been used to being, because they can't reach out and touch somebody or walk by the office to have the
Right.
conversation on how we're doing. And we have visual overload, so to speak, especially for those employees that it's a struggle for them to start using Zoom and Teams and things like that. So what is it, if any, advice that you could give for us to kind of impart on those managers and how we could take these 9 focus areas to and translate them into the virtual world we kind of work in now?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, but it's also a very loaded question. Uh, the reality is none of us expected COVID to impact us in a way that almost coming up on 2 years away from team members, right? Especially agile work, all our ways of working in the past has always been, high contact, high communication. And in just a day, we went from being in office to, working from home for 2 years in a row. So I think what has happened is a couple of things. So one is people have realized that they are more in meetings now than they were in when they were working face to face, which actually is not true. They were still meeting people, but a lot of conversations happen in the hallway while getting coffee. Now you have to set up a meeting for each and everything. So people are getting Zoom fatigue. People are losing that connection, the human to human connection. So what I don't think I can solve the problem for you, but what I would like to share with you is to act as a leader, to be there for your team members. And really, if you think about a cookie jar, right, that you are actually putting in cookies into your jar. So when you do have to take out some cookies, you have some there. So being nice to the rest of the organization and the team, and making that connection and engaging with them, and then getting their buy-in on any change that you want to do. Right now, any small change that any organization is trying to do is extremely difficult, because we don't know for how long. I mean, a couple of months ago, we thought we're all going to go back to office, but now this Delta happened and nobody really knows. So it's tough, really tough. So I appreciate where you're coming from. But I'm going to restate the importance of engaging the middle managers and really trying to help them actually become change agents or ambassadors of change, and truly get buy-in on those 9 items is going to help. I'm going to stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I see a question from Celia. Any thoughts, ideas on opening a meeting like an icebreaker or story for team meetings that will discuss organizational change? Yeah, that's a great one. One of my favorites, Celia, is, and I use that a lot, I would talk to a team member, most of it one-on-one though, is I would say, hey, if you had a magic wand which gave you all the powers, so you didn't have to depend on the finance or the leaders of the organization, but if you had the powers to make any change in that organization, what is the first change that you're going to make? And that question always has very interesting responses, because most of the time people think that any change that needs to happen needs to come from somewhere else. And they feel that they are not empowered to make the change. So for that 5 minutes or 10 minutes when they feel that they have power to make that change, they really think of some really creative solutions. And they also think about problems that need to be solved. So I found that to be very interesting and, always very forthcoming. So I, definitely try that and see how that happens, but also make sure that if you're asking that question, that you have the ability to now take that problem or the change management opportunity and actually turn it around and make a difference for the team.